Hello, and welcome to Survey Magazine's webinar series. The title of today's webinar is A Decade of Innovation, Lessons from the Confirmit 2013 Market Research Technology Report. Today's event is sponsored by Confirmit. My name is John Lehman, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I want to review a few housekeeping items and let you know how you can participate in today's session. Throughout our presentation, we'll encourage you to interact with our speaker by typing in comments and questions on the right panel, right side of your screen. We will be collecting your questions and comments during the presentation and conducting a question and answer period after today's presentation. If you'd like to join the conversation on Twitter, the hashtag is #surveywebinar. The Twitter handle for today's guest is Confirmit, @Confirmit. We'd love to have you connect with us and keep the conversation going beyond today's event. Also, we're recording today's session, and we will make the link available to you at least 48 hours after the event is over. Now I'd like to get on to today's speakers. Today we're presenting more of a conversation with two esteemed colleagues that have been working on this study together for a number of years. I'd like to introduce Tim Macer, who is Managing Director of Meaning Ltd., and Wale Omiyale, Senior Vice President, Business Development at Confirmit. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and hopefully everybody can hear us. So just introducing ourselves, I'm Tim Macer.
And I'm Wale Omiyale.
And it's great to have you with us here. Yeah, we have a lot of fun doing this survey, actually, so we'd like to take you through some of the results. As you can see from the title, we're talking about a decade here because this is actually the 10th anniversary of this particular survey. So we're going to be doing it for 10 years, and that means we've accumulated quite a lot of interesting tracking and trending information over that period. So just to say a little bit about the survey itself, the survey itself is of market research companies and rather than individuals. And it is conducted in 35 different countries worldwide. 240 market research companies we included in this particular survey, and so it's quite a good spread that we have. We always interview senior technology decision makers or decision influencers or business owners. And also, we make sure that it's quite a short online interview that we do, so it's a 15-minute interview offered in 5 different languages with email invitations and then a response after that, of course, sampling by country, and we sample according to the SMR frame. And we've been doing this every year since 2004. Now, there's a lot in the actual report itself, too much to go into in the space of our webinar today, so we thought we'd just pick out 4 things that we thought might be of interest to you. We're looking at some of the trends that we've been picking up, and then 2 of the topical areas that we looked at, voice of the customer or customer enterprise management programs, looking a little bit at mobile surveys, and then finally going on to look at the 10-year view. Some questions that we asked about looking back over the last 10 years and looking forward into the future as well, and some quite interesting things came out of those too. So jumping into the trends to start off with, well, we do have quite a lot of data going back almost at the beginning of the survey. In this case, going back to 2006, we've been asking people about what the different trends are in the data collection modes. And you can see that from this that the one thing that has been dominating and increasing over the whole period there is the web or online data collection mode. So starting off at 40% and really rising up to more than 50% in 2013. There is movement every year. It's a fairly small sample we're talking about here, so some of that turbulence really just comes from the size of the sample that we do. But despite that, there are some fairly consistent trends that can be seen there. We're also looking at, over the same period, not so much a decline in CATI as many would have predicted. I mean, if you hear people talking about it, you would have thought, say, 10 years ago, people were thinking that CATI would be over by now. But it certainly doesn't seem to be the case. It's holding its own. little bit of decline I think we can see there, but very modest. In fact, the decline really has been in the area of paper. But what this also shows is some of the modes that haven't really been progressing that much. We would have expected over the period, I think, to see more growth in mixed mode, but that has really remained pretty flat. And also mobile CAFI we're talking about here, very, very small. We do actually ask about mobile as a mode as well, but that is so small that it doesn't really feature on here. It's really only at about the 1 or 2% line.
Yeah, and just on that point, Tim, I think the really interesting modality there really is CATI. You know, as you mentioned, you know, it was a few years ago predicted to fall quite dramatically, but we're actually seeing strong growth in CATI, specifically around the B2B sector, and interestingly so in the last number of years around the VOC space as well. So, you know, we predict CATI will not only remain relatively flat, we think there will actually be growth in that sector.
So it seems to be emerging as a specialized
Absolutely.
mode now rather than the mainstream mode. I've also moved on there now to the next slide, which talks about the long-term trends in data collection modes. So we've been asking about where people get their online sample from, and we've been doing that really from the beginning of the survey. This particular slide, we're looking at the volumes involved actually, and the extent to which people are using these different sources. And I think the interesting thing that comes out of this is that third-party and access panels has increased slightly. It started off at a fairly good base in the first instance, but it has actually been increasing. And what we're now looking at is it was sort of rising up to about 35, more than 35%, 37% of volumes. Whereas in the same period, people running their own panels seems to have declined slightly. I mean, in fact, we also ask another question, or we have asked this question in previous years, as to where people think the trends are going to go. And everybody's been predicting, actually, that they would be making less use of bought-in sample and more use of their own panels. But actually, over time, the opposite seems to be happening here. The specialist modes, well, I think the other two modes that you see at the bottom there are really just helpful to show that we have actually captured all the different modes that people are talking about here. There's always going to be sample provided by the client, and then the other specialist providers people will be using, and others. It shows here that there aren't really that many other sources that people are turning to, so this does still pretty much account for it all.
And I think this might probably be one of those issues where, you know, what we say in market research often doesn't pan out to be exactly what we do. You know, the cost of maintaining and managing your own panels is extremely expensive, and I think the reality is that people are deferring to specialists in this area, you know, and it's interesting to see, you know, at least from a access panel perspective, you know, that there's strong growth in the use of access panels, and I think that bodes well considering the price pressure that sample companies are under at the moment.
Yes, not something we would have necessarily been expecting from what people were saying their intentions were. Our next slide shows you the other side, what comes out of the process, the research deliverables. And, well, right the way from the beginning, we've noticed that PowerPoint is pretty much a dominant deliverable and not quite ubiquitous. It does look as if, according to this, there are some projects that don't use PowerPoint, but in fact, I suspect if anything, understates what's really going on there. But the other modes, we can see there's quite a lot of turbulence in these other modes, and from year to year, it does look as if different people are trying different things. We didn't start asking about dashboards until 2009, so that got introduced at that point. We didn't actually ask people whether they were using Excel, because earlier on we didn't even think Excel was a deliverable, but it seems that Excel is a fairly significant deliverable vehicle that people are using. What seems to have been in decline over that period is Word, people using Word as a means of disseminating their reports. I suspect actually what we're seeing there is just replacement of Word into PDF, people actually distributing to PDF, which is perhaps not that interesting. But I think what is interesting is that despite all of the excitement that there is about online delivery of results, it still accounts for a small minority of the outputs that are there. It's not really growing in the way that perhaps you might expect. I think it is on an incline, but it's a very, very modest one.
And I think, from a technology point of view, it's a little bit disappointing to see that, PowerPoint is still the dominant, deliverable to clients. You would have expected, with all the advancements in digital visualizations that, as an industry, market researchers would be using more digital dashboards. Perhaps maybe we are on the beginning of the upward trajectory on this. Only time will tell. I think the interesting thing, however, and we're going to probably move on to this next, is the use of printed tabs. And that as a deliverable is decreasing quite dramatically, which probably means that there's opportunity for other deliverables to actually play a much more stronger and significant role.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this is a question that goes right the way back to the beginning of the survey, 2004. It's one of the few where we've actually got comparable data right the way through. And over those years, we've been asking, well, where do you think the crosstab is going to be in the future? We specifically, the wording of the question, you can see at the bottom there. Specifically, we're asking here about using crosstabs as a deliverable to produce volumes of cross-tabular reports. And it does look as if over the 10 years now, there is a slight downward trend, but it is pretty modest. That seems to contradict in a little bit with what's going on the previous slide there, where it was shown as fairly significant decline. But that is more because I think it's still an internal requirement. I don't think crosstabs are going to go away as an internal, but it does look as if we're getting to the point where the clients are no longer expecting or no longer wanting, the big block of tables that used to be the thing that gave credibility in the past.
And that's probably reflecting in the change in nature of clients as well. Clients are looking for probably more, I wouldn't say simplistic data, but easy to digest reports and easy to digest deliverables, and that probably points to the fact that crosstabs will still play an extremely important role in the research mix, especially in the in the analytics mix. Yes. But in terms of the deliverable, probably less so.
Yes. I think one other take-home from this really is the fact that these trends show that market research is a fairly conservative industry, and it takes a while to change. It does change, and there is change that we're detecting here. But if you're in the uncomfortable position that you go to a conference and hear all these people talking about all these new wonderful things, and you start feeling that you're way behind everybody else, I think these actually help show that there is a long development tail behind all of these things as well before they actually become widespread in their use. But it is good to see that it is actually starting to happen. So moving away from the trends, let's move to our next section now, which is some questions specifically about voice of the customer and customer experience management. There's been a lot of discussion about this in the industry, about the extent to which market research companies should be moving into this area or are moving into this area, or the extent to which clients want them to do this. So we thought we'd ask a few questions about this year and find out exactly what's going on and what all the attitudes are. And you can see there, those are the topics that we explored, and we'll go into these now in a little bit more detail. So our first question was just asking whether the company is actually involved in any customer satisfaction, voice of the customer, or customer enterprise CEM programs, whether there's any of this going on at all. And overall, we found that, like a lot of these other questions that we asked throughout the survey, that actually there's quite a split in the industry as to what's going on. So we have here a group of companies who are doing this a lot. We have another group of companies at the other end of the spectrum there who, for them, it's relatively unimportant, not part of their work. So it looks as if there are specialists and niche players in this, and then there are firms that are doing quite a lot. When we roll this out and look at how this splits by company size, and so we by company size here we're meaning the sort of the companies with a turnover of a few million, as opposed to the companies at the top end that are the big multinational corporations. We see that there's an even more obvious division there, because the larger companies do tend to be involved to some extent in this. But in a strange sort of thing, the specialism seems to be in the middle tier. It seems to be the medium-sized companies that there are some niche players there that are saying it is a major part of our work, and that seems to be what they're focusing on. The smaller companies seem to be finding it harder to get into it.
And I think this is really sort of like where the analogy of the sort of the super tanker, the speedboat comes into play. The larger companies, from our experience, tend to be more engaged in the multinational, meaty, heavy-duty, multimodal VOC programs, whereas the small to medium-sized companies tend to be more engaged in the sort of like the tactical, not full-blown VOC type programs, but more along the lines of customer satisfaction type work, which really plays into their strengths. In our experience, a lot of the small to medium-sized companies can do this tactical work more efficiently because they're just more flexible, they're more nimble, and sometimes are more, adaptable to the client's changing requirements. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a role for them within the VOC mix. And I think you'll find a lot of the more smaller companies tend to be sitting on the consultancy fence and sitting on the, the advisory fence within the VOC mix. But it is an interesting, split across the industry.
Yes. Now, our next question really was to find out what they mean by VOC or CEM type activities. What are they actually doing? And it looks like everybody's involved in customer satisfaction surveys. This is the PowerPoint of the CEM area. So it's the customer satisfaction surveys. I think what's more interesting is to dig down into these slightly more exotic methods, or certainly more exotic methods to many market research companies in what they're doing. So NPS surveys accounts for almost 40%. NPS surveys with additional questions seem to be quite common as well, but the more unusual methods are cropping up much less frequently. So people doing interactive voice surveys, working through comment cards or short feedback type surveys, or micro surveys on mobile devices or communities and forums. These ways of reaching out to get that kind of customer feedback is much less common. And following on from that, the next question we asked was about the actual services that they deliver on the back of these different collection methods. Again, to try to see the extent to which people are getting under the skin of what's different about VOC and CEM work. And you can see, again, the same sort of trend there. The reporting on the customer satisfaction, of course, is way up the top of the list there. But getting into the things that are arguably more difficult to do, there's quite a rapid drop-off there. Encouraging to see that dashboards actually feature quite a lot, considering when we looked earlier on, we could see dashboards weren't really featuring terribly much in the market research mix generally, but it does look as if with these kinds of programs, dashboards are important and they're showing up there. And real-time customer service alerts as well I was quite pleased to see that. That really was quite surprising to see it such a large number there. But some of the other things are really not taking off. I don't think research companies seem to be looking to, for instance, analyze other data that are there, call center logs, email traffic, website activities, all of those things which actually CEM firms would be looking straight at that and probably starting there rather than with the surveys. So there's a bit of a gap there still.
And I think the data points back to what you said earlier. What do people understand by VOC and the mix? And one of the reasons why I think customer satisfaction surveys is very, very strong is because most of them are driven through online surveys, and so therefore it's a natural progression to move into that direction. The interesting thing for me is that when we talk about dashboards being delivered as a component, that feeds into automatically sort of like the business value of a CRM program or a VOC program, as opposed to just the customer satisfaction level. And the NPS scores are then driven by action management, which is why we're starting to see more in the alerts column,
yes.
And more activity around the real-time alerts, because that's really where the action management plays in or kicks into play.
Yeah, yes, that's right. Closing that feedback loop.
Exactly.
Yes. So our next question was really to find out, well, what are the struggles, what are the challenges that the research companies are finding in moving into this territory? And we gave them a list of different options, 12 different options here, and we're just showing here those that were picked most frequently. It's a question format we use, and we've used that in other parts of the survey as well, where we give them this list and then we allow them to pick what the first one is, and then they can pick another two as well. And we look at it both in terms of what's the first one, what do people think is the most important one, and then what are the other, well, the top three altogether. The all mentions is the top three altogether. And aggressive competition is the looking over your shoulder at what everybody else is up to seems to be the biggest concern that people have. Perhaps not surprising, but I think some of the other observations here are a bit more interesting, which is really one of them, which I think is particularly true with anybody approaching this from a research perspective, is dealing with the poor quality or the incomplete nature of these other data sources that you have to work with. I think this is a very common problem. It's not one that's easily solved necessarily, and that shows up certainly not as the main problem, but actually one of the pick for most people, for a third of the sample. Same with creating the reporting systems that Wale was just mentioning there, the dashboards. It is a difficult thing to do, and people are still learning about how to do that at many different levels.
And to be honest, I think that's really where the value in the VOC program is being driven at the moment these days. When we look at the kind of work our clients are doing, in the VOC mix, it's actually delivering those real-time reports that you can take action upon.
Comments and dealing with the comments, there's a very different unstructured type of the data came up quite a lot. And actually in the report, we didn't have time to do it today, but in the report there's another section where we asked all about text and text processing. Some quite interesting stuff going on there, because I think that's still very much underutilized in market research. Integrating the client systems seems to be a problem. That is certainly a difficult thing to do. But then the other one here at the bottom, I think, is quite interesting. This whole idea of realizing that there are new skills that need to be developed as well. And we actually dug into that a little bit more in our next couple of questions. We asked them both the sort of the inner skills and the outer-facing skills, the ones that you developed in-house, and which are the other ones where you're going out to outsource to buy them in as well. And just starting with the first one there, I was surprised to see this, because I actually think it's something that market researchers are pretty good at. Statistical modelling and statistical analysis. So I'm surprised that people think they're inadequate in that area, because actually I think it's probably, I would have picked the second one, the business consulting, as being an area that you'd imagine firms would be wanting to develop, and developing their skills in customer experience management and those kind of client-facing type activities. So that was a bit of a strange one there.
And once again, it might boil back down to the fact that we're still looking at VOC as traditional market research rather than looking at it as something completely different, or not completely different, but an extension. That's right.
So the answer is more numbers and more clever statistics, and in fact maybe the answer is really better business consulting and interpretation of it. But down near the bottom there, we've also got text money. Well, this is in the top 6. It's fifth of the top 6. Again, is the text. It comes up again as being an area where people are developing skills. And then looking at the outward-facing ones, the outsourced areas where they're going outside to grab things, grab those skills. We've got graphic design coming up the top, and I don't think it's the one I would have thought would have come at the top, but I can understand why, because actually it's back to Wale's point about the importance of the communication and the dashboards there. You're going to need a very effective way of communicating all of these findings to a much wider audience when you're doing customer.
I was actually quite pleased by that, because I think this whole notion of big data and the massive amount of data that we're dealing with when we're doing VOC programs, simplifying that or concising it into an easy to digest format is incredibly difficult, and using graphics to actually deliver that rather than your boring PowerPoint is really the way to go.
Yes, yeah. So I think some good candid responses there, I think, from our participants in this, and it shows that firms are aware that they do need to boost their skills in order to excel in this area. So we rounded off this section by asking people, well, where do they see the future is for market research in this mix? and what role do they see that they're going to be providing in this? And top of the list here came providing reliable survey data. Well, in a way, it seems like an obvious thing, but in actual fact, that is a very worthwhile activity because customer CEM and VOC work does benefit from actually having that good quality survey data going into it, which not all VOC proponents would necessarily turn to. And I think that's a particular skill of the research industry in providing that and the pedigree that it has in doing that. But interesting, I thought, to see the second one there about providing the expertise as well, so that actually helping customers become more self-reliant and more independent by providing them with the expertise in the research methods as well, or working with partners in providing that input into it. And the third one, I think, is something which, well, the research industry should actually be very proud of. It's something that it is actually very good at doing, is providing the expertise in data reliability. And as they've already observed in the survey, one of the problems is, of course, dealing with data of dubious quality, not even knowing how reliable those data are. And I think this is an area where research could actually come in or researchers could be very, very useful people as part of a larger program to do that.
I mean, when we look at the fifth one down, taking a lead role in operating these programs, and this is one that I would have thought market research would have been, primed to take, given the good quality data that we supply to VOC programs, rather than taking a back step, take the lead role in these various VOC programs, because most VOC programs do have the ear of the board. And market research, every conference we go to, that whole mantra, how can we get access to the board? How can we get a greater voice in front of the executives? And running VOC programs is an ideal way for us to actually demonstrate not only can we provide quality data as an industry, but we can also provide quality insights and actionable data.
Yes, it's as if the people here are being really quite modest about what it is that they can bring.
And maybe we need to be a little bit bolder as an industry and actually take that lead role.
Yes. So that rounds off our section on voice of the customer, enterprise feedback management. And we're now going to move on to our third section, really, which is mobile devices. Just a few things to show you here on the mobile front. We have actually covered mobile in a bit more detail in previous years, so if you've not seen those studies, you can pull those down as well and have a look at what we've been doing there. But this year, there were just two things that we focused on, and one of them is some questions about if people are purposefully doing a mobile survey, what platforms do they think they need to support? Because it's a difficult task always to support all of the platforms or all of the different ways you can do it. You could do a survey by browser, by an app, or we've included here tablets as well, if they're actually going to do face-to-face usually on a tablet. So we wanted to see which were being supported. And when it comes to browser, you can see that actually neck and neck pretty much. We've got firms saying we can support Android or we can support Apple iOS on a browser. So people accessing the survey on a smartphone, that covers quite a lot of the market share in most markets, but of course not everywhere. And it does look as if people are then taking the decision that we're not going to bother to support Windows Phone, even though it is there, it is an important player, they're not a dominant player, and some of the other. Down the bottom there, we've got BlackBerry and then Symbian. Again, they seem to be in the we can't quite get that far category for quite a lot of the firms. Some of them support all, of course, but many of them not. We then had a look at apps. We asked them, well, if you're creating surveys for to be taken with an app that you would download, what's the picture there? And here a gap starts to open up between Android and Apple iOS. So it looks as if people are taking the conscious decision that if they can only support one, they're going to support Android. If they can support two, they'll support Android and Apple. But some will do without and just support the one. And the gap has widened here between these other methods, these other platforms as well. So Windows, BlackBerry, and Symbian all getting less of a look in there. Then the third one, which is not quite these two, of course, have big implications for sampling. and the representativity of the survey if you're not actually reaching all of the people that could participate. With Tablet, just to complete the picture there, we can see this is a little bit different because, of course, usually you're controlling it. So actually, you're going to get 100% reach on whatever device you decide to use because it's all down to where the field workers actually go with that device. So it's a slightly different proposition here. But again, that split is there. It looks as if people are more keen to develop for Android than they are for Apple iOS, but a little bit more keen to develop for Windows at that point.
And you know, from a technology point of view, you can really understand why, because as you mentioned, not only is it expensive to develop apps, and it's equally expensive to maintain them and moving forward. You know, a lot of organizations, whether they're, you know, research companies that are developing their own apps or, you know, software vendors that are developing their own apps, are choosing and picking and choosing which apps are going to win the day. The biggest challenge, I think, however, will be, you know, in some markets and in some, you know, in some regions, you haven't got the luxury of being able to choose between, you know, Apple and Android or, you know, any other device, especially when you think about, you know, countries like, or regions like Asia, Sub-Sahara, Africa. It becomes incredibly difficult if you can't, you know, send your surveys out on feature phones, for instance, which are probably not supported by Android.
Well, that's right. So in that context, if you're only supporting Apple and Android, and in fact the market is full of Symbian phones, you're going to be a bit stuck. You're going to make sure you've got to find some software that does actually support that. And of course, we're talking here about mobile platforms which they may have developed in-house, because a lot of research companies do develop their own software, or the ones that are professionally developed by well, it's not fair to say professionally developed by companies, software companies. And I mean, not all the software companies actually support all of them. I think you support all of them.
I think we're quite fortunate that we've got both legacy support and modern platform support as well. Yes,
yes. So the second part of these questions that we asked here were about the unintended, not the purposeful mobile participants, but the unintended ones that find their way into surveys or try to start surveys. And we've been tracking this for a few years now. And I thought it'd be interesting just to see what's been going on here. So the first slide we've got at the top, or that first chart at the top there, shows the question that we asked was how many people are trying to take your surveys online. Basically, that's what it is. You know, the wording of the questions at the bottom. It's how many survey starts have you got at the moment with people trying to use a mobile device to access an online survey. And over the 3 years, we can see that it's gone up. Now, I mean, this is probably one of the most dubious statistics that we present, and I'll explain why. Because, of course, we're relying on people to say at a particular point in time how many there are. And anybody that does this work knows that actually it varies survey to survey, it varies sample file to sample file. So there's enormous variation in this. So actually, an average is kind of meaningless. Yeah. But I think it's a very useful sort of stake in the sand each year to see what's going on. And we can see that over these 3 years, certainly the perception is it's going up, and it's going up quite rapidly. Yeah. And digging into what the more detailed picture is for the 2013 sample, you can see there that actually it's higher in the Asia-Pacific region. Again, it's a big generalization because there's an enormous amount of diversity in the Asia-Pacific region as well. But we can also see that it tends to be the larger firms and the medium-sized firms that are experiencing more of it than the smaller firms. And I think that might be down to the fact that the smaller firms are often using panels, and where you're using a panel, the demand is suppressed because the panel company will often insist that people actually take the survey on a desktop or a laptop. And most people often report that actually if you're just using sample from a customer, it can be up to or over 50% that are trying to do that. So this is a growing problem that we're picking up.
In fact, I'd almost go so far as to say the numbers are probably higher than that.
Yes.
In the sense that, if you're buying sample from an external provider, you may or may not know what device they use to respond on. The provider will know, but you may, as a researcher, not know. So.
Well, indeed, that's right. And I mean, I just happened to have queued up that next slide while Wale was saying that, because this shows exactly that, in effect, that actually, out of all of the questions, we don't normally report the don't knows because they're only 2 or 3% in most cases, but here it's an interesting statistic in itself because over a third of the people in our survey, and this is senior people in these companies, couldn't actually give us a measure. Now, it could be that they couldn't give us a measure simply because it's a daft thing to be asking. What is the average? It's a meaningless one. But I suspect it is just because there is a general level of unawareness of this still, which really needs to be addressed because people are going to get caught out big time by this. So that rounds off our section on mobile devices, and so we're now on to the last section here, which is about the 10-year view. And, well, some serious questions, some fun questions actually, in what we put in here, because what we wanted to know was really, looking back over the last 10 years, what did people consider was the most significant or most influential technological development over the last decade? And then we asked them what they thought had been the biggest disruptor, where technology had been a disruptive influence. We then finished off by a real fun question actually, was asking them about what did they think was the must-have piece of technology. So this was the wording of the actual question itself. Looking back, what do you think is the biggest technological change? And there we've got the results to that. And way up the top there, in fact, with a very clear lead, is smartphones, tablets, and mobile technology. So that is what the industry thinks has been the most influential, according to our survey anyway, is smartphones, tablets, and mobile technology. And then coming second to that, and it wasn't most people's first pick, but look at how big the first pick was on the first one there, the mobiles. But it wasn't people's first pick, but half the people, almost half the people in the survey, also said they thought social media and the social web had been a huge change, and we're implying that positive change there. And the third one, which kind of interesting in the context of what we saw earlier, multimodal research, which actually doesn't really feature a lot in terms of volumes, but people do seem to consider that has actually been important.
I think the interesting one for me is the 1% assigned to text analytics, which you would have imagined should have been a lot higher, but interesting that only 1%.
Yes, it seems unfair really, because I would say the last decade has been the decade in which text analytics
really
has matured and has actually become viable and useful. And solving a problem that's grown up as well with all this text there is to analyse. Yeah. So that is a kind of a puzzle, is that. Anyway, lots of interesting things in there. So, but moving on to the next one, which is what have been the bogeymen over the last 10 years? What is it that people consider has actually messed things up as far as business and market research is concerned? And the thing that came top there is the DIY survey. That seems to be the figure of hate for most of the research companies. DIY surveys. Just look how many people there were that actually cited that in their top 3. An enormous number, and even a third of them saying that was the number one as far as they were concerned.
And that's an interesting one because we've discussed this before, Tim. That the notion of the DIY survey has been around for longer than 10 years. And, is this just a knee-jerk reaction to, the activities of Google surveys in the market? If you think back 10, 15 years ago, Market Tools was out there with its early iterations, SurveyMonkey was out there, even Bain's recent acquisition of Macromill, yes, with their, quick research survey application. So it's not a new phenomenon. It might be that it's just a recent, injection of DIY survey applications that are actually beginning to turn the market.
Yes, that's right. But I think it does look as if there is a feeling out there that the DIY survey providers are out eating our lunch. Yeah. Now we dug in a little bit more with this one to see how does this actually split. We looked at it by company size, and there wasn't any particularly major difference by company size here, but there was an interesting difference in the one that got rated top by global region. And so in North America and in Europe, DIY surveys came top, but they were third out. They were displaced by two others. They were actually third in the ranking in the Asia Pacific region. And in fact, it was privacy concerns that came top in Asia Pacific. And that featured as the second one, and a fairly close second actually, features the second one in Europe, but it didn't feature at all in North America. And I think that, in a way, that stacks up with my own experience of where the concerns are about privacy. I think there is concern about it in North America, but it isn't to the same extent, I don't think, as it is in Europe. And I hadn't fully understood for this that the same concern was there and amplified in the Asia-Pacific area, actually.
I think definitely from the Asia-Pacific region, when you think about a lot of the economies are, from a market research perspective, still very much in their youth. And so they're beginning to deal with sort of issues around privacy that perhaps maybe, economies in the West have dealt with many, many years ago. So they're one or two steps behind the curve in terms of getting up to speed with privacy issues, but it is catching up. And I would imagine that, that's as standards become more in line with what we see in Europe and North America, perhaps maybe those concerns will begin to diminish.
Yes, and I wondered whether that also is why DIY did not come at the top, because again, there's not been such a long pedigree of doing research, and so people's memories aren't quite so long. In fact, it could be that many researchers in China, Japan, Southeast Asia, for instance, have grown up with the DIY survey. It's just part of the landscape, and so you just get on with it. Now, our last question in the survey was this slightly more fun one, really. In fact, in the history of our survey, it's the first gamified question that we've introduced, but we thought we'd have a go. And so we said, if you were to start your own research company tomorrow and you were going to go out shopping for some technology, what would be the one piece of software that you think that you would need to give your company the greatest business advantage? So money, no object, just anything that you like. And for this, it was a completely open-ended question. There was no compulsion to complete it, but 175 of our 240 people did, so we were quite pleased with that. And we got an enormous range of answers. And we're very helpful to our friends over at Scribe, Language Logic, for doing the coding on this and grouping them together for us. And in fact, they came up with these three different groupings of answers that they thought that there were some people that were asking for technology which was essentially an incremental change or development of what there was now, was within the realms of possibility. There were some which were kind of further out, as they put it, the ones which are harder to imagine. It would be hard to find a piece of software that actually did that or just doesn't exist yet. And then there were some that were surprisingly modest, which we'll look at in a moment as well. And so here, I'll just throw up some of the answers that came up here, the kinds of things that people were looking for in terms of incremental developments. In fact, you may disagree with our categorization. Some of them you may have put into the more far out one, I don't know. But these all seem to be things that seem like good ideas to me, certainly. And interesting to see what it is that people think that's the kind of tool that they would want in order to give themselves an advantage. The more exotic ones, we had neuroscience capable, for instance. We had a great one here where it's a very selective list of things, each of them quite difficult to do, I think. We have one on CAPI. Well, I'm not quite sure with this one what future the researcher actually has in all this. If you have a system that just sends out emails and automatically sends the client the PowerPoint results.
I think we're moving towards the world of the DIY analysis.
Yes, watch out for that one. So some fairly interesting and imaginative responses to this, actually, and we've listed a few more of these in the report. And then one or two that we thought were surprisingly modest, considering that this was where you could go out and buy anything, that somebody said, well, what I need is some cost-effective mixed-mode data collection, which actually there's a fair abundance of that around, really. And and some mention of the pricing, and this one amused us as well, actually, that Excel, somebody that would be quite happy with Excel, because after all, who needs anything else? You can do everything you need with Excel. Interesting that PowerPoint didn't show up at all. It was Excel that did. So those were the findings out of that. And that really wraps up what we wanted to show you in the out of the survey. So just a few very quick conclusions here to wrap it up. And one of them is in the trends, and what we thought really stood out with the trends was about the mobile volumes being low, but there are these changes, and the bulk tabs finally starting to fade out very, very slowly. We think that it's a slow burn, and we suspect that they're always going to be there because they will be required internally. We're also finding that the voice of the customer and customer enterprise feedback management activities dominated very much by the larger companies, and also relying very much on the voice of the customer satisfaction and fairly traditional research rather than the more exotic ones. And then finally, we've got mobile and social media being the big game changers, and DIY surveys being the big disruptor. But it depends on the region, because actually privacy and do not call and mobile were also seen as disruptors there. So we'd like to throw it over to some questions at this point.
I'd like to really thank you, Tim and Wale. This was a fun presentation to go through. I really appreciate your time. We do actually have a couple of questions that were posed by the audience, and one of the first questions, I'm not sure who should field this, whether it should be Tim or Wale, but the attendee says the dashboards look promising. Do you think that the dashboards will eventually overtake the Microsoft PowerPoint as a deliverable?
This is Wale speaking. I think over time, depending on what you want to present and how you want to present, and the type of audience you want to present, the dashboards present you or provide you with a much more interactive view of the data that you can't get from PowerPoint. Will PowerPoint disappear in total? Well, judging from the results of the survey, no. Market research is still very much dependent on PowerPoint. I think it's really going to be led by the clients. If the clients are going to demand more interactive, more flexible access to their data, then I think they will gradually begin to be more dominant in the marketplace than PowerPoint will.
I suppose my response to it is has a little bit of a hope in it as well, in that I don't think PowerPoint will necessarily fade out, but I hope that people will actually be using PowerPoint for what it's good at doing and not for what it's bad at doing. And it's very bad, I think, as a method of disseminating lots of data and lots of results. I think it's reasonably good for putting together a story and for debriefing people on things. And so I think in the context where there is a debrief going on, well then it makes sense, I think, to be using PowerPoint. But I don't think PowerPoint is a good way to be distributing results to people. And I think it depends on the nature of the research project. But if it's one where it's a single point in time and you actually want to present a story out of it, well, PowerPoint probably does have a role to play there. Although it's not the only tool. We were using Prezi to present today, which I think is a far better and more flexible tool, for instance, than PowerPoint. There are other solutions, and I think also some software developers in the research space are developing storyboard and storytelling type tools as well. And so I think they could be the ones that displace PowerPoint more. But the dashboards, I think it's more that the dashboards should take the pressure off PowerPoint being asked to do things that it was never designed to do.
Yeah. And I think one of the risks we face is attempting to force PowerPoint style reports into dashboards, and that's a big no-no.
I couldn't agree more.
There are other tools and other ways of, like Tim said, infographics is another deliverable that we should be examining, especially when it comes to the storytelling aspect of things.
And I think it will get easier. I mean, I think, it's expensive developing dashboards on a one-off basis, and people are learning a lot of new skills how to do that. The software is getting better all the time. The skills are being developed, and so I think there will come the time when it won't be that much more effort to put the results together in a dashboard than it is to put them together in PowerPoint. In fact, it may even be better, because it's not effort-free preparing a PowerPoint presentation. Do we have another question, John?
Very good, gentlemen. Here's a question specifically for Confirmit. The attendee is wondering, how is Confirmit adapting to the trends in tech marketplace, especially as it relates to PowerPoint deliverables to the client?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get that question. How does Confirmit what? Sorry.
How is Confirmit adapting to the trends in technology, especially as it relates to PowerPoint as a deliverable?
I'm not entirely sure what the what the question is,
how is Confirmit?
Yes. Yeah. So I mean, at Confirmit, PowerPoint is just one of the outputs that we deliver. It hasn't changed that much over the years, and so it's not in a sense a progressively evolving application within our reporting applications. What we do at Confirmit is provide a wide range of different reporting capabilities, whether you want it in PowerPoint, in PDF, whether you want to deliver digital dashboards, and whether those dashboards are, static dashboards or whether they're interactive dashboards. That's how Confirmit views the world. We take a very open approach in terms of our reporting suites. We provide an extensive array of APIs that allow us to integrate with third-party applications as well. So even if you're looking at integrating into a third-party reporting capability, you can do that with the APIs we've developed. So we're not static, but I don't think PowerPoint is the platform of the future. I think it's an established platform. But I think in terms of developing new reporting capabilities, that's definitely something that we're working on very hard here at Confirmit.
I mean, as a user of your software, Wale, what I've noticed, of course, is that you do support PowerPoint as being an output deliverable, so you get things out into PowerPoint. And I think that this is something sometimes that people developing systems or in-house, in research companies as well as the software developers, it's something they need to be really mindful of, is that actually the dashboard isn't the end of the journey for the data. The dashboard's very often the beginning of the journey for it, and it's so important that the people that are using it can then get it out and play with that data and communicate it with other people with whatever tools they have available. And of course, they're never going to have dashboard creation tools. No. They're likely to have Excel and PowerPoint on their desktops, and so that's why I know most developers hate it when they go along and they present their dashboard, and the first question they get asked is, does it write it out to PowerPoint? Yeah. But it is actually a legitimate question, and it's something that you need to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as I mentioned, and as the report mentioned, PowerPoint is still the dominant deliverable that researchers are using. Is it the most appropriate one? Is it the only one? No. Will it be the case in 10 years' time? I'm not sure, perhaps for a few researchers, but there are lots of new reporting applications that are coming out onto the market today. Some really, really exciting, interesting ones as well. And I think, as I mentioned, infographics is an area that is going to be very exciting for researchers if we're looking to tell stories to our clients. So there are other options that we as a software company are looking to explore and develop as well.
Have we got time for another question, John?
Yeah, I think we do have time for another couple questions. I'll try to put two of them here together. This goes back to the actual survey instrument. One of the attendees would like to know kind of the percentage of methodology, quantitative versus qualitative. And another attendee is interested to know, among your respondents, is it primarily a B2B respondent or a B2C? So I'll leave that up to you in terms of who would respond.
Yes. Well, in recent years, we have felt emboldened to ask some slightly more qualitative questions in there. We avoided them for quite a long time, but we have softened our line on that recently, and so we do have a few. But we're very strict about the time on the interview. The interview we advertise it as being a 15-minute interview, so we try to be very well behaved. In actual fact, when I looked at it, the median length of the survey was 16 minutes last year, but that doesn't take into account the fact that some people get broken off, or they're doing other things while they're doing our survey. How dare they? And so I think I'm fairly comfortable if we have a 16-minute median, 15 minutes is about what we're doing. So within that context, of course, it really limits how many qualitative questions you can ask. So we could probably, because they do, of course, take longer to complete. So it is a quantitative survey, unashamedly a quantitative survey, with a few qualitative elements in it, like that last question, the gamified question that we showed you. We didn't try to present that in a quantitative way. It is absolutely B2B. In fact, it's even stricter than that. It is companies only that we survey. We only survey research companies, and so the way we do that is we will actually contact individuals in these companies that we think are likely to be important in the decision-making process, and we only accept one response from each company. If it's a big company, we take the view that if we have a response from them in, say, the United States, and we have another response from them in Germany, and another response in China, Hong Kong, we would accept those three, because in fact our observation is that the way that companies work in the individual markets, they're often fairly autonomous and do things quite differently. So we do have a little bit of overcounting of the big companies, but in actual fact most of the companies in the survey are the small to the medium-sized ones, which I think reflects what the spread, what the mix is there anyway.
And I think it's a fair international spread as well. You know, it's not just concentrated or weighted towards Europe or North America. You know,
that's right.
It's a study that covers, you know, market researchers across the globe.
It does, and we do it we translate it into French and German and Chinese and Japanese. Yeah. And if anybody has any good ideas as to how we can up our response in China or Japan, send me an email, because we would love to do that. It's an area that we struggle with particularly.
Okay, gentlemen. Well, listen, thank you very much. It was an enjoyable presentation. And for all of the attendees that are here today, I would like to thank you for joining us. You will be receiving an email that will alert you to an on-demand status of today's event, so that you can review the material if you've missed any of it or simply just want to go over it again. On behalf of our guests, Tim and Wale, as well as the management team at